Chapter 1. The Silver Chains. The grand ballroom of Iron Peak glittered with false promises. Sarah kept her eyes downcast as she navigated between tables laden with crystal and silver, her movements precise and unremarkable. Years of training had taught her to become invisible, a shadow in human form, noticed only when summoned and forgotten the moment she retreated. Her uniform was the color of ash, designed to blend with the stone walls. The iron cuff around her throat bore the mark of the Highland Syndicate, the organization that had purchased her before she was old enough to understand what ownership meant. "You there?" The voice of Mistress Vara cut through the ambient noise like a blade. Section 7. "You'll serve the delegations from the Frost Territories tonight." Sarah nodded without meeting the head servant's eyes. Section 7 meant the highest-ranking wolves, the most dangerous assignment. These were the ones who viewed servants as objects, whose inhibitions dissolved with each glass of blood wine they consumed. As she turned toward the supply corridor, Mistress Vara's fingers dug into her shoulder, pressing deliberately against the brand hidden beneath her uniform. "Remember what you are, girl. One misstep, and you'll join the others in the Hollows." The Hollows, where disobedient slaves vanished, where her friend Kaya had been dragged 3 months ago for the crime of meeting in Alpha's eyes. "Yes, mistress." Sarah's voice emerged as it had been trained, soft and devoid of personality. Every breath she took carried the scent of wolfsbane and ashroot, herbs sewn into her collar to suppress her omega nature. An unclaimed omega had value. One who had been properly processed by the syndicate was merely useful. Her worth had been calculated, documented, and burned into her flesh before she'd even presented. In the quiet of the supply corridor, Sarah caught fragments of excited whispers from younger servants hurrying past. The Apex Alpha himself from the Shadowcrest Mountains. They say his wolf is massive, silver with eyes like winter stars. 34 years old and never taken a mate. Sarah continued past them without pause. The politics of wolves who ruled territories meant nothing to someone whose existence was measured in tasks completed without error. Alphas or common wolves, they all looked the same from her lowered perspective. The storage room offered brief solitude. Sarah allowed herself 3 deep breaths, her small ritual of personhood, counting each inhale as a tiny rebellion. One day, she told herself, these breaths would be taken in freedom, though how remained a mystery locked behind iron collars and legal documents. Something caught her eye, a small leather pouch that had fallen behind one of the shelves. Curiosity overcame caution. Inside, she found a smooth crystal, pale blue and perfectly round. A moon crystal, contraband for servants who were forbidden from possessing anything that might amplify their natural abilities. Moon crystals strengthened the connection between human and wolf, making suppression nearly impossible. Without thinking, she slipped it into the hidden pocket she'd sewn into her uniform months ago, something that belonged to no one else. Just for a moment, the ceremonial bells rang, signaling 1 hour until the delegations would arrive. Sarah tucked away her stolen moment and gathered fresh linens, resuming her role in the machinery of service. Back in the grand ballroom, she moved with practiced efficiency, draping fine cloths across tables that would soon support the elbows of wolves who considered her kind as furniture rather than kin. Servants were arranged by height and appearance. Sarah, with her unusual violet eyes and black hair, was positioned where the most important guests would sit. "Pretty things for pretty wolves," Mistress Vara often said, her voice carrying the bitter edge of someone who had learned this lesson personally. As final preparations neared completion, the atmosphere shifted. Guards straightened. Servants lowered their gazes even further. The air itself seemed to still. The alpha nobles had begun to arrive. Sarah took her position against the wall, hands clasped, eyes downcast. She had performed this role countless times at endless functions. Tonight would be no different. Serve, vanish, survive. Through her lashes, she watched the procession enter. Expensive furs, glittering jewels, and predatory grace. Alphas moving in choreographed patterns of dominance and submission. Political hierarchies displayed in body language even the most oblivious beta could read. What followed was predictable. Seating arrangements, introductions, veiled insults masquerading as compliments. Sarah poured wine, replaced plates, and disappeared between necessary moments, exactly as trained. Then the seneschal's voice boomed through the hall. "Apex Alpha Kalen Northmire of the Shadowcrest Mountains." Despite herself, Sarah's curiosity sparked. The Shadowcrest Mountains had abolished servitude generations ago. Their delegation was rumored to treat even Omega wolves as equals, a concept so foreign it seemed like fantasy. At the same time, a strange sensation prickled along her skin. Not quite pain, not quite pleasure. The moon crystal in her pocket seemed to warm, though that should have been impossible through the thick fabric. The massive doors swung wider, and he entered. The air thickened. Her wolf stirred, actually stirred, for the first time in years. Apex Alpha Kalen Northmire moved like a storm given form, power contained in deliberate restraint. Tall, broad-shouldered, with silver-black hair and features that seemed carved from the mountains themselves. But it was his eyes that arrested every gaze in the room. Ice blue and ancient, missing nothing, cataloging threats, measuring worth. Those eyes swept the gathering with cool assessment. Then they found her. Sarah's training screamed at her to look away, to fade, to disappear. Yet she couldn't move. Between one breath and the next, something impossible happened. A connection snapped into place. An invisible cord pulling taut between them. Time slowed. The room fell away. Despite the wolfsbane and ashroot, despite years of brutal suppression, her wolf surged forward with such force that Sarah nearly gasped aloud. Mate. The recognition wasn't just in her mind. The Apex Alpha's step faltered. Imperceptible to anyone not watching with her intensity, but to Sarah it might as well have been thunder. His nostrils flared slightly, eyes narrowing, head tilting in that subtle way wolves catch an elusive scent. He found it anyway, despite everything designed to hide her. Mistress Vara's sharp elbow in her ribs broke the moment. Wine girl. Now. Sarah's body responded automatically while her mind remained locked in shock. She collected the crystal decanter with trembling hands and approached the high table where Kalen Northmire now sat at the right hand of the Highland Alpha, Lord Brennan. She kept her eyes down, fighting the inexplicable pull to look up, to meet that ice-blue gaze again. Her wolf prowled beneath her skin, more awake than it had been since childhood, demanding. As she leaned forward to pour the wine, Lord Brennan's son, Garrett, shifted his arm deliberately into her path. The decanter tipped, dark red liquid splashing across the pristine tablecloth. Clumsy creature, Garrett snarled, his hand striking out with practiced cruelty. The blow never landed. In a movement too fast to follow, Kalen Northmire's hand caught Garrett's wrist midair, stopping it with such force that bone ground audibly. The room fell silent as death. Touch her, Kalen said, his voice soft as falling snow and just as cold, and you'll lose the hand. Horror rippled through the gathering. No one moved. No one breathed. Garrett's face drained of color under the weight of that stare. She's just a servant, property of the Highland. She is mine. 3 words spoken with such absolute certainty that they seemed to rewrite reality itself. My mate. The declaration ignited chaos. Lord Brennan sputtered indignantly. Nobles rose from their seats. Guards moved toward the high table, uncertain which alpha to defend. Sarah stood frozen, the decanter still clutched in white-knuckled hands. Her entire existence balanced on the knife's edge of this impossible moment. Without breaking eye contact with Garrett, Kalen extended his hand toward her. Not grabbing, not commanding, offering. Your name, he said, his voice pitched for her alone, though in the stunned silence it carried. No one had asked for her name in so long that Sarah's voice stuck in her throat. Her wolf pressed forward, desperate to answer his call. Sarah, she whispered, the sound of her own name strange on her tongue. Something softened in his severe expression. Sarah, he repeated, as if tasting the word. Come. Lord Brennan found his voice. This is outrageous. The slave is Highland property, purchased legally. And there is no legal purchase of any wolf within the territories governed by the Northern Accord. Kalen interrupted, his attention never wavering from Sarah. A fact your council conveniently overlooks at these gatherings. The peace summit, someone began, will proceed once my mate is safely under my protection, Kalen finished. His hand remained extended, patient yet unyielding. Your choice, Sarah. Always your choice. Choice. The word hit her like a physical blow. No one had ever offered her choice. Deep down, she knew the truth. The moment their eyes had met, something fundamental had shifted in the universe. The mate bond wasn't myth. It was slamming through her with the force of a hurricane, recognizing what her conscious mind was still struggling to accept. As the tension stretched to breaking point, Sarah became aware of the moon crystal pressing against her thigh through the fabric. Warm now, almost hot, as if responding to the apex alpha's presence. Maybe it was fate, that strange force that had prompted her to take the crystal just hours before everything changed. Her body moved on instinct, her fingers reaching for his. The moment their skin touched, a visible shudder ran through Kaelin's powerful frame. The connection between them flared like wildfire, consuming any doubt that might have lingered. Fire bloomed beneath her skin. Sarah felt her wolf rise completely for the first time in years, joyful and straining toward its other half. Kaelin drew her gently behind him, positioning his body between hers and the rest of the room. The protective gesture was so foreign to her experience that Sarah nearly stumbled. This summit was called to address territory disputes, Kaelin addressed the gathering, his voice carrying unquestionable authority. Perhaps we should begin by discussing the Highland Territory's continued violation of the servitude prohibition clauses. Lord Brennan's face purpled with rage. You dare threaten our sovereignty over a serving girl? Over a claimed Omega who has been disciplined and trained for her position. I dare much more than threats, Kaelin replied simply. Then, without warning, he turned to Sarah. Show me. She understood immediately what he meant. Slowly, reluctantly, she pushed up her sleeve, revealing the brand that marked her as property of the Highland Syndicate. The stylized wolf's head surrounded by chains, burned deep enough to ensure the scar would never fade. The air around Kaelin changed, growing heavy with the scent of controlled rage. His eyes flashed from ice blue to silver as his wolf surged forward. Without looking away from her brand, he addressed the room with deadly calm. The delegation from the Shadow Crest Mountains withdraws from these proceedings immediately. His hand found Sarah's again, gentle despite the fury radiating from him. My people are leaving. All of my people. The implications hung in the air like storm clouds. War. Broken alliances. Economic collapse for territories dependent on Shadow Crest trade. All over a serving girl no one had bothered to name. As Kaelin guided her toward the entrance where his guards now formed a protective circle, Sarah felt the weight of countless eyes burning into her back. The muttering grew, accusations and disbelief swirling around them like poisonous smoke. She hadn't spoken a word beyond her name, hadn't consented or refused, hadn't processed the seismic shift that had just shattered her existence. The bond pulsed between them, new and fragile, yet undeniable. Her fate had changed in an eye blink. From owning nothing to, what? Royal mate? Political pawn? Something else entirely? Before they reached the doors, Garrett's voice cut through the chaos. This is manipulation. Check her for moon crystals. Omegas use them to fake mate bonds with powerful alphas. It's an old trick. The moon crystal in her pocket felt suddenly heavy as a stone. As if sensing her panic, Kaelin's hand tightened around hers. We leave now. His voice broke no argument. Not from her, not from anyone. As they stepped through the massive doors into the cool night air, Sarah's world tilted on its axis. Behind her lay everything she had ever known. Captivity, invisibility, survival. Before her stretched something unimaginable. Possibility. Her heart skipped as the unknown future rushed toward her. The apex alpha, her supposed mate, towered beside her, his presence both terrifying and exhilarating. And just like that, everything changed. His touch burned hotter than the iron that had branded her. Not with pain, but with a terrifying promise. Freedom came with a price, and Sarah wondered if exchanging one master for another, even one called mate, was truly escape or merely a more beautiful cage. Chapter 2. The Frost Protocol. The Shadow Crest delegation moved with military precision through Iron Peak Hold's sprawling grounds. A formation of silver-cloaked guards surrounded Kaelin, and Sarah like a living shield. No one spoke. The tension vibrated in the air, thick enough to choke on, as distant sounds of chaos erupted from the summit hall behind them. My lord! A Highland servant rushed toward them, his face pale with panic. The gates have been ordered sealed. Lord Brennan demands. Lord Brennan, Kaelin interrupted without breaking stride, is about to learn the difference between demands and consequences. As if summoned by his words, a bone-chilling howl split the night, joined immediately by another, then another, until the chorus surrounded the entire compound. Wolves. Dozens, perhaps hundreds, their voices harmonizing in the ancient call of a pack rallying to their alpha. The servant stumbled backward, terror etched across his features. Without another word, he fled into the darkness. Sarah trembled, not from cold, but from sensory overload. The herbs dulling her senses were fading quickly, burned away by adrenaline and proximity to the apex alpha. Sounds became sharper, scents more distinct. Most overwhelming was Kalen himself. Cedar and winter stone, and something darker, like lightning before a storm. Yet despite his iron grip on her hand, he hadn't spoken directly to her since they'd left the hall. His attention remained on their surroundings, ice-blue eyes constantly scanning for threats, body coiled with lethal readiness. The space between them buzzed with unspoken questions. As they approached the main gates, Sarah gathered her courage. "They'll come after you. After us." Her voice emerged steadier than she felt. "Highland wolves don't surrender what they consider theirs." Kalen's gaze shifted to her face, intense and unreadable. "Nor do I." The simple declaration sent a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with fear. The bond between them pulsed like a living thing, though she fought to ignore it. Mate bonds could be rejected, she reminded herself. Nothing was truly fated, only convenient or inconvenient. Without warning, the massive iron gates swung open before them. Beyond stood an army of shifted wolves, their eyes gleaming in the moonlight. The Shadowcrest pack in battle formation. At their center waited an enormous silver wolf with eyes like pale fire. Obviously Kalen's second-in-command by the deference shown. "Ronan will ensure safe passage," Kalen explained, finally addressing her directly. "We've secured a property 5 miles beyond Highland borders. Neutral territory." From there, Sarah moved through events as if in a dream. Guards shifted to wolf form, flowing like shadows through the night. She was guided to a covered carriage, a luxury she'd never experienced, while Kalen conferred quietly with his officers. As the carriage door closed, separating her from her supposed mate, relief and disappointment warred within her chest. The moon crystal still pressed against her thigh through her pocket, and the accusation from the hall echoed in her mind. Check her for moon crystals. Omegas use them to fake mate bonds. The truth felt old and bitter. She hadn't intended deception. She'd simply pocketed a beautiful thing, a small act of rebellion. Now it seemed like damning evidence against her. In the quietness of the carriage, Sarah extracted the crystal. It pulsed with gentle blue light, warm against her palm. Without thinking, she leaned forward and tucked it into the cushioned seating, pushing it deep into the upholstery where it wouldn't be found. One problem solved. Yet the larger question remained. Why had the apex alpha claimed her? The carriage lurched forward, and through the small window, Sarah caught a final glimpse of Iron Peak Hold, the only home she'd ever known, though it had never been a sanctuary. Strange how leaving a place of suffering could still feel like loss. The journey passed in tense silence. Occasionally, howls echoed through the night, communication between pack members. Each sound made her flinch, expecting pursuit that never materialized. By the time the carriage slowed, dawn had begun to stain the horizon with pale gold. She hadn't realized she'd been drifting in and out of sleep until the door opened, revealing Kalen's imposing silhouette against the brightening sky. In the early light, she could see details missed before. A thin scar bisecting his left eyebrow, the slight silver at his temples, the weariness beneath his regal bearing. "We've arrived," he said simply, offering his hand. Sarah hesitated, then placed her fingers in his palm. The contact sent that now familiar jolt through her system, her wolf stirring eagerly despite her human caution. As he helped her from the carriage, the world expanded around her. Not a military encampment as she'd expected, but a sprawling stone manor nestled against dense forest, with mountains rising majestically in the distance. "The Winterglen Estate," Kalen explained, watching her reaction closely. "My family's diplomatic residence. We're beyond Highland reach here." A female wolf approached, tall and regal, with striking green eyes and auburn hair streaked with silver. She wore practical clothing rather than finery, her only adornment a silver pendant bearing the Shadowcrest crest. "My sister, Alara," Kalen introduced, "head of our diplomatic corps." Alara's gaze traveled over Sarah with undisguised curiosity, lingering on the servant's uniform, the still visible brand on her wrist. Without preamble, she addressed her brother. "It's true, then. A mate bond." "Yes." His response left no room for debate. "Under extraordinary circumstances," Alara noted, her tone carefully neutral. Her attention returned to Sarah. "You must be exhausted. And hungry." The simple acknowledgement of her basic needs, so long ignored by others, momentarily robbed Sarah of speech. She managed a nod. Alara's expression softened fractionally. I've prepared rooms for you. Food, clothing, anything you require. Separate rooms, Kaelin clarified, something complicated passing between the siblings. Adjoining but separate. The implication struck Sarah like a physical blow. Despite the mate claim, despite appending an entire peace summit, he wasn't assuming ownership. The realization was so foreign she struggled to process it. As they entered the manor, Sarah became acutely aware of her appearance. The ash-gray uniform now wrinkled and stained with wine, her hair falling from its severe bun. Her skin bare of the cosmetics Highland servants were required to wear to appear uniform and unremarkable. The interior reflected understated wealth. Polished wood, natural stone, elegant furnishings that invited use rather than merely admiration. So different from the ostentatious display of the Highland court. Servants, or were they simply pack members, moved about with purpose but without the cowering deference she was accustomed to seeing. Several nodded respectfully to Kaelin, but didn't avert their eyes. One even smiled at Sarah, the gesture so unexpected she couldn't return it. Alara led them upstairs to a suite of rooms in the east wing. These overlooked the forest, she explained, pushing open heavy wooden doors to reveal a sitting room bathed in morning light. Bedroom through there, bathing chamber beyond. Your rooms connect through the shared balcony, she added, nodding toward Kaelin. Before Sarah could respond, Alara continued briskly. Clothing has been provided. Our healer, Mira, is approximately your size. She's prepared herbs for bathing as well, to help with. She gestured vaguely at Sarah's neck where the scent-suppressing herbs were still faintly detectable. Thank you, Sarah managed, the words feeling rusty and inadequate. I'll leave you to settle in. Alara squeezed her brother's arm in a silent gesture of support before departing, closing the door softly behind her. The sudden privacy was overwhelming. Sarah stood rooted in place, unable to move further into rooms larger than any she'd been permitted to occupy. Unable to look directly at the alpha who had claimed her before an entire summit. Between them, something cracked. The careful restraint Kaelin had maintained since their flight from Highland territory. In 3 long strides, he crossed to the windows and flung them open, inhaling deeply as if the manor's walls were suddenly too confining. When he turned back, his eyes had darkened to storm gray. You have questions. It wasn't a question itself. Sarah swallowed hard. Why did you do it? Claim me. You know why? His voice roughened. You felt it too. The mate bond. I did, she acknowledged, forcing herself to meet his gaze. But you're an apex alpha. You could have ignored it. Many do for political reasons. Kaelin's expression sharpened. Is that what you were taught? That mate bonds can be dismissed for convenience. I was taught nothing except obedience. The words escaped before she could temper them, raw with years of suppressed bitterness. His jaw tightened, anger flashing across his features before he mastered it. The bond can't be ignored. Not by me. He took a measured step toward her. But it can be rejected. By you. The air thickened with tension. Her wolf stirred beneath her skin, pressing forward with such insistence that Sarah's eyes shifted involuntarily from violet to gold. As wind shifted through the open windows, his scent enveloped her, stronger now without the herbs to dull her senses. What happens if I reject it? She whispered. Pain, he answered honestly. For both of us. We would survive, but it would be difficult. Understatement of the century. Her wolf seemed to growl. The bond between them pulsed visibly now, a silver-blue thread connecting their bodies that grew more tangible with each passing moment. As the silence stretched, Kaelin's shoulders tensed almost imperceptibly. You need rest. Time to think. He moved toward the balcony doors. Food will be brought. Anything else you require, you have only to ask. He was giving her space. Freedom to choose. The concept was so alien that Sarah couldn't formulate a response. Without another word, Kaelin stepped onto the shared balcony, pausing at the threshold to his own rooms. One truth before I go, he said, his voice dropping to a register that made her skin prickle with awareness. I would have stopped the summit for any enslaved wolf, but I would have burned down the entire Highland territory for you. The intensity of his declaration hung in the air between them as he disappeared into his quarters, leaving Sarah alone with the weight of choices she'd never been permitted to make, and the terrifying possibility that freedom might mean choosing him. Chapter 3: Gilded Cages. Luxury could be its own form of prison. Sarah discovered this as she sat wrapped in silk robes worth more than her entire existence, watching sunrise glint off crystal bottles containing perfumes she wasn't sure how to apply. Freedom meant choices, and choices required knowledge she'd never been allowed to acquire. 3 days had passed since their arrival at Winterglen Estate. 3 days of careful distance maintained by Kaelin, who seemed to sense her need for space despite the mate bond pulling tighter with each passing hour. 3 days of servants, no staff members, treating her with deference that made her skin crawl, not because it was unpleasant, but because it felt undeserved. The apex alpha of the Shadowcrest Mountains had upended international politics for her, yet barely knew her name, which meant, Sarah reasoned, that the mate bond was either manipulation or madness. Perhaps both. With restless energy, she paced the luxurious chambers that still felt more like accommodations than home. The clothes provided fit well enough. Simple tunics and trousers rather than dresses, as if Alara had intuited her preference for mobility over adornment. The scent-suppressing herbs had been replaced with a milder mixture that allowed her natural omega scent to emerge gradually, preventing the shock to her system that immediate withdrawal would have caused. Every consideration had been made for her comfort. Yet beneath the solicitous attention lurked unspoken questions about her past, about her future, about the expectations that came with being claimed by an apex alpha. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Not at her main door, but at the balcony entrance. Her pulse quickened as she moved to answer it, knowing only one person would approach from that direction. Kaelin stood outlined against the morning sky, more casually dressed than she had yet seen him. Dark trousers and a simple white shirt unlaced at the collar, revealing the hollow of his throat. Without the formal attire of leadership, he appeared somehow more approachable, yet no less powerful. "May I come in?" he asked, his deep voice stirring something primal in her chest. Wordlessly, Sarah stepped back, allowing him entry. Her wolf surged forward with such eagerness that she had to concentrate to prevent her eyes from shifting. "You've been avoiding me," she observed, surprising herself with the directness of the accusation. A slight smile curved his mouth, transforming his severe features into something dangerously appealing. "Giving you space," he corrected. "There's a difference. And if I don't want space?" The question hung between them, more revealing than she'd intended. Kaelin's ice-blue eyes darkened, pupils expanding slightly as he studied her face. "Then I would ask what you do want." His gaze remained steady, unflinching. "Because after a lifetime of having choices made for you, Sarah, your wants matter more than protocol or politics or even mate bonds." The sincerity in his voice disarmed her. With every heartbeat, she could feel the connection between them strengthening. No longer just instinct, but something deeper, emotional tendrils reaching across the careful distance they'd maintained. "I want understanding," she finally said. "I want to know why the apex alpha of the Shadowcrest Mountains threw away a peace summit for a slave he'd never met. Why you risked war with Highland territory. Why you claimed me when you could have simply purchased me if freedom was your concern." Rather than answering immediately, Kaelin moved to the open balcony doors, bracing his hands against the frame. The morning light carved his profile into sharp relief, highlighting the tension in his shoulders. "The mate bond is rare," he began, his voice pitched low. "Rarer still among leadership whose unions are typically political arrangements. My parents were an exception. True mates who found each other despite being from rival packs." He turned to face her, expression grave. "I watched what happened when my mother died in childbirth with my younger brother. My father survived physically, but the bond break nearly destroyed him. He ruled but never lived again." Sarah's chest tightened at the raw pain etched across Kaelin's features. "You feared the same fate if you denied our bond." "No." His response was immediate, almost fierce. "I feared denying you your rightful place because of outdated prejudice and arbitrary hierarchies. Bond or no bond, no wolf deserves enslavement." He exhaled slowly, visibly gathering himself. But the moment our eyes met, I felt everything shift, as if the world had been slightly wrong until that precise moment. The confession hung in the air between them, devastating in its vulnerability. This was no practiced diplomatic speech, no calculated political move. This was truth offered without expectation. As the silence stretched, Kaelin's gaze grew more intent. "You didn't answer my question yesterday, about rejecting the bond." The air thickened with tension. "I don't know how to answer," Sarah admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've never been allowed to want anything, especially not something as impossible as this." "Nothing about this is impossible," Kaelin countered, taking a careful step toward her. Unexpected, yes. Complicated, certainly. But not impossible. He moved closer still, close enough that she could detect the subtle changes in his scent responding to her proximity. Cedar and stone warming with hints of amber and something wilder. Her wolf surged with recognition, with longing so intense it made her dizzy. "May I?" he asked, his hand lifting toward her face. Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. With glacial slowness, Kalen traced the curve of her cheek with his fingertips. The contact sent electric currents cascading beneath her skin. His touch was reverent, restrained, the touch of a predator capable of destruction, yet choosing gentleness. With every heartbeat, the mate bond pulsed stronger. No longer a silver-blue thread, but molten connection flowing between them. Under the weight of his stare, Sarah felt simultaneously exposed and sheltered, as if he could see every broken piece of her yet found value in the fragments. "I have something for you," Kalen said, reluctantly breaking the charged moment. From his pocket, he withdrew a small package wrapped in soft leather. Sarah accepted it cautiously, unfolding the covering to reveal a silver pendant similar to the one his sister wore, but distinct. Instead of the Shadowcrest crest, this bore an intricate design of a wolf with sapphire stones for eyes, surrounded by a crescent moon. "It's beautiful," she breathed, running her finger over the detailed craftsmanship. "It was my mother's," Kalen explained. "The crest of her original pack before she joined the Shadowcrest. She would have wanted you to have it." The significance wasn't lost on Sarah. A gift of immense personal value, chosen specifically for her. Not a generic trinket bestowed upon a favored servant or concubine. "I can't accept this," she protested, even as her fingers curled protectively around the pendant. "You can," he countered, his tone gentle but firm. "Not as my mate, that choice remains yours, but as a free wolf who deserves to carry symbols of her own choosing, not brands forced upon her flesh." Tears pricked unexpectedly at Sarah's eyes. She had cried exactly twice in her memory. Once when first branded, and once when Kaya disappeared to the hollows. Both times the tears had been private, hidden weaknesses that could be exploited. These tears felt different. Not sorrow, but something overwhelmingly like hope. "Thank you," she managed, the words wholly inadequate. Kalen nodded, understanding passing between them without further explanation. "There's something else," he said, his expression shifting subtly. "Information you should have before making any decisions about your future." The sudden seriousness in his tone sent a chill down Sarah's spine. "What information?" "My diplomatic team has been investigating your background. Standard procedure when bringing any new wolf into leadership protection." He paused. "They found something unexpected in Highland Territory's slave registry." Her wolf bristled defensively. "What?" "Discrepancies in your acquisition documents. Inconsistencies in your origin story." His ice blue eyes held hers steadily. "Sarah, there's evidence suggesting you weren't born into slavery at all. You may have been taken, stolen as a young child." The revelation struck like physical impact, driving the air from her lungs. "That's not possible. I've always been property." "That's what they wanted you to believe," Kalen finished when she faltered. A memory surfaced. Fragments she'd long suppressed. A woman's voice singing. The scent of wildflowers. A small blanket clutched in tiny hands. Images without context. Sensations without explanation. "If this is true," she said slowly, struggling to process the implications, "then who am I?" Kalen's expression tightened with restrained emotion. "That's what we're trying to discover. But there's more. Something potentially dangerous for both of us." The balcony doors suddenly burst open, admitting Alara, her composed diplomatic demeanor replaced by unmistakable urgency. "Kalen, Highland envoys have crossed onto neutral territory. Lord Brennan himself leads them." "How many?" Kalen demanded, instantly alert. 20 wolves fully armed," Alara reported grimly. "They're demanding the return of stolen property and threatening war if refused." The space between one breath and the next stretched into eternity as Sarah processed what this meant. They had come for her, to reclaim their investment, to punish her escape, to erase the embarrassment of an apex alpha choosing a slave as mate. Kalen's voice cut through her rising panic. "Assemble the council. Full defensive positions." He turned to Sarah, his expression softening despite the crisis. "You have a choice. Face them at my side as potential future Luna, or remain here under guard. Either way, you will not be surrendered. Not now." Not ever. As tension broke around them, Sarah made the first truly free decision of her life. With trembling fingers, she fastened his mother's pendant around her neck. "I'll stand with you," she declared, her voice stronger than she felt. "Not because of the mate bond, but because I refuse to be property again." Something like pride flashed across Kalen's face, quickly masked by determination as he extended his hand. Then we faced them together. As their fingers interlaced, the bond between them flared with such intensity that both their eyes shifted simultaneously. His to alpha silver, hers to omega gold. In that moment, the incomplete fragments of Sarah's identity seemed less important than the unshakable certainty taking root within her chest. She might not know who she had been, but she was beginning to understand who she could become. Chapter 4. The Confrontation. Standing beside an apex alpha should have made her feel powerful. Instead, Sarah's fingers curled around the crescent pendant at her throat as Lord Brennan's gaze burned into her with such hatred that she wondered if freedom was worth the price others might pay for it. The great hall of Winterglen Estate hummed with barely contained aggression. On one side stood the Highland Territory delegation, 20 wolves in formal attire that didn't quite conceal the weapons beneath. Lord Brennan occupied the center position, his aging features twisted with indignation, flanked by his son Garrett and a thin, spectral man Sarah recognized with a jolt of fear. Overseer Damon, head of the Highland Syndicate, the man whose signature authorized every brand pressed into slave flesh. Opposing them, Kalen's council formed an imposing barrier. Ilara, the diplomatic chief, a massive bear of a man introduced as Torval, war commander, and 3 other high-ranking pack members whose names blurred in Sarah's anxiety. Behind them stood a dozen elite guards, their expressions stone, hands resting casually on sword hilts. Between these forces, Kalen stood with deceptive calm, one hand resting lightly at the small of Sarah's back. The touch anchored her, though whether it was the mate bond or simply his unwavering presence, she couldn't tell. "This discussion," Kalen stated, breaking the tense silence, "will proceed with respect for neutral territory protocols. No weapons drawn. No shifting." Lord Brennan's lip curled. "You lecture us on protocol while harboring stolen property." "I see no property here," Kalen countered, his voice dangerously soft. "Only free wolves on diplomatic grounds. That creature," Brennan jabbed a finger toward Sarah, "is a registered asset of the Highland Syndicate, documented by proper authorization and bearing legal identification marks." The brand on Sarah's wrist seemed to burn anew under the collective gaze that turned toward her. Unlike in the summit hall, however, she wasn't wearing servant's gray, but a simple tunic of shadow crest blue, the sleeves deliberately shortened to display her unmarked wrist, the brand concealed by a leather cuff Ilara had provided. Overseer Damon stepped forward, his thin voice carrying surprising authority. "Remove the covering. Show the mark." Before anyone could respond, Garrett added with vindictive satisfaction, "And search her for moon crystals. Omegas have tricks for manipulating alpha responses. The mate bond is clearly fabricated." Genuine confusion flickered across Kalen's features, so brief that only Sarah, attuned to him through their strengthening bond, noticed it. He didn't know about the moon crystal she'd found and hidden. The accusation had true foundation, even if her intentions had been innocent. Shame bloomed hot in her chest. Yet as quickly as it arose, a countercurrent of defiance surfaced. She had not engineered this situation. She had not asked to be claimed or rescued or thrust into international politics. As the tension thickened, Sarah straightened her spine and addressed Lord Brennan directly. "Would you like to explain how I came into Highland possession?" Her voice emerged stronger than she expected. "The exact circumstances of my acquisition." Confusion replaced some of Brennan's arrogance. "What nonsense is this? You were born property like all your kind." "Interesting." Ilara stepped forward, a document case in her hands. "Our investigation into territory slave registries suggests otherwise. Subject number 4721, the designation given to Sarah, appears in Highland records 18 years ago without birth documentation, purchase transfer, or breeding registration." Overseer Damon's sallow complexion paled further. "Administrative oversight. Nothing more. Or evidence of kidnapping," Torval rumbled, his massive arms crossing over his chest. "Trafficking of freeborn wolves across territory lines. A direct violation of the Northern Accord, punishable by—" "Enough," Brennan barked. "We didn't come to debate ancient paperwork. We came for what belongs to us." Throughout the escalating exchange, Kalen had remained silent, his silver gaze calculating as he observed the Highland delegation. Now he spoke, his tone deceptively conversational. "You've brought the syndicate overseer to a diplomatic meeting," he noted. Curious choice. Unease rippled visibly through the Highland party. Damon shifted his weight, eyes darting toward the exit. "Unless," Kalen continued, "this isn't about a single escaped slave at all. Unless recovering Sarah is crucial because of what she might remember, what she might reveal." The atmosphere in the hall changed, charged with newly dangerous currents. Sarah felt it like electricity against her skin. Kalen wasn't improvising. He was executing a carefully planned strategy, using the Highland delegation's arrival exactly as he'd anticipated. "What are you implying, Apex Northmire?" Brennan demanded, though his heartbeat had accelerated noticeably, detectable even to Sarah's recently unshackled senses. "I'm not implying anything," Kalen replied smoothly. "I'm stating that your syndicate has been systematically abducting freeborn Omega wolves, particularly children, from neighboring territories for nearly 2 decades, falsifying documents, erasing identities." The accusation landed like a physical blow. Several Highland delegates exchanged alarmed glances. "Preposterous," Brennan blustered, but the denial lacked conviction. Overseer Damon, however, had gone completely still, the unnatural stillness of a predator about to strike or flee. His gaze locked onto Sarah with such calculating malevolence that she instinctively pressed closer to Kalen. "The Omega means nothing," Damon said suddenly, his voice oddly flat. "A simple servant, hardly worth international incident." "Then why come in force to reclaim her?" Kalen challenged. "Why risk violating neutral territory?" No answer came. Instead, something silent passed between Brennan and Damon. A nearly imperceptible nod. Without warning, Garrett lunged forward, not toward Kalen as everyone expected, but directly at Sarah. "If she's so precious to you," he snarled, claws extending despite the no-shifting rule, "perhaps we should ensure you have nothing to claim." Everything happened with disorienting speed. Guards surged forward. Alara shouted a warning. Kalen moved to intercept, but the angle was wrong, the distance too great. Yet what should have been a fatal moment revealed something unexpected. Sarah wasn't helpless. Years of navigating treacherous service among unpredictable alphas had honed instincts she'd never been permitted to acknowledge. As Garrett's claws slashed toward her throat, Sarah dropped and pivoted, using his momentum against him. He careened past, off balance, directly into Torval's massive fist. The young alpha crumpled unconscious to the marble floor. Stunned silence fell over the hall. Sarah stood frozen, as shocked by her own reflexes as everyone else appeared to be. The pendant at her throat seemed suddenly warmer, though that had to be imagination. "Enough!" Kalen's voice cut through the tension, power rolling off him in palpable waves. "This meeting is concluded. You will take your son and leave neutral territory immediately, Lord Brennan. Further aggression will be considered an act of war." The Highland Alpha's face contorted with barely contained rage. "This isn't over. That slave has diplomatic protection under Shadowcrest law," Kalen interrupted. "More importantly, she has my personal protection. Consider carefully what that means before your next move." As guards moved to escort the Highland delegation out, Overseer Damon's calculating gaze remained fixed on Sarah. "Clever little dove," he murmured, too softly for most to hear. "But do you remember the lullaby? The one about silver stars and sapphire skies?" The seemingly nonsensical question struck Sarah like lightning. Images cascaded through her mind. A soft melody hummed in darkness. A woman's gentle voice. The scent of pine and honey. The memory was so vivid, so unexpected, that she gasped aloud. A triumphant smile spread across Damon's gaunt features. "I thought not," he whispered. "But you will. And when you do..." Guards separated them before he could finish, marching the Highland delegation from the hall. The threat, however, lingered like poison in the air. Kalen was at her side instantly, concern evident in his expression. "Are you hurt?" Sarah shook her head, struggling to process what had just happened. "He knew something about my past. A lullaby about silver stars and sapphire skies." "Sarah," Kalen completed, his voice oddly tight. "That's..." Before he could continue, Alara approached urgently. "The documents you requested have arrived from the Shadowcrest archives," she informed Kalen, her expression grave. "And you were right. The royal crest of the Starcrest line bears a silver star on sapphire blue. the bloodline supposedly extinguished in the Eastern Rebellion 20 years ago. Under the weight of his stare, Sarah struggled to comprehend the implications. "What are you saying?" Torvald joined them, his massive presence somehow reassuring rather than threatening. "The timing matches," he confirmed gruffly. "The age, the disappearance. It could be her." Rather than explain, Kaelin took Sarah's hand and led her to a small anteroom adjoining the great hall. There, spread across a table, lay ancient documents and one magnificent tapestry depicting a royal family tree. At its bottom branch, a name had been embroidered and then violently crossed out. Princess Seraphina of the Starcrest line. Presumed dead. "This is impossible," Sarah whispered, her fingers hovering over the defaced name. "I'm nobody. A servant. Property." "No," Kaelin countered, his voice gentle but firm. "You're the last survivor of the Starcrest royal bloodline, the rightful heir to the Eastern Territory throne." And he added, something complicated passing through his expression. "Betrothed from birth to the Shadowcrest royal line as part of an alliance treaty never fulfilled because of your family's overthrow." The pendant at her throat seemed suddenly heavy, its significance transforming from simple gift to royal insignia. "Your mother's pack," she realized aloud. "It wasn't just any pack. It was the Starcrest line." "It was," he confirmed. "Our families were allies for generations. The pendant recognized you, Sarah. Royal artifacts carry old magic, responding only to true bloodline. That's why it warmed when Garrett attacked." As the silence stretched, truth unraveled between them in all its messy complexity. The mate bond hadn't appeared by cosmic accident. It had been ordained before either of them drew breath. A political alliance transformed by fate into something far more powerful. "So you knew," Sarah said finally, hurt crystallizing in her chest despite all logic. "You claimed me because of bloodlines and treaties." "I claimed you because the moment our eyes met, everything in me recognized you as mine," Kaelin interrupted, fierce conviction in every syllable. "I investigated your background afterward, looking for leverage against Highland Territory's inevitable retaliation. Between them, something cracked, the careful restraint both had maintained since her rescue." "I don't know how to be royal," Sarah confessed, vulnerability bleeding through her newly constructed defenses. "I barely know how to be free." Her breath caught as Kaelin stepped closer, eliminating the careful distance they'd preserved. "Then be neither," he murmured, his hand rising to cup her cheek with exquisite gentleness. "Simply be Sarah. Be the wolf strong enough to survive enslavement without breaking. Be the woman courageous enough to stand beside me against her captors mere days after gaining freedom." The bond between them pulsed with undeniable power, strengthened rather than weakened by revealed truths. Political alliances and royal bloodlines seemed suddenly insignificant compared to the connection blazing between them. And what of the moon crystal? Sarah forced herself to ask, needing complete honesty between them. "The one they accused me of using to manipulate the mate bond. I did have one. I found it the day you claimed me." Rather than anger or betrayal, Kaelin's expression softened with something dangerously close to adoration. "Moon crystals don't create mate bonds, Sarah. They only amplify what already exists. Royal wolves, in particular, respond powerfully to them. It's in our bloodlines." Her wolf surged forward, pressing so close to the surface that Sarah's eyes shifted involuntarily to liquid gold. As the space between them burned with potential, the final barriers of caution and propriety threatened to dissolve completely. But before either could move, an urgent knock shattered the moment. Elara entered without waiting for response, her expression grim. "The Highland delegation has departed," she reported. "But they've left something behind. A formal challenge document bearing the syndicate seal." Her troubled gaze shifted to Sarah. "They're invoking ancient law, the right of claimed property." "What does that mean?" Sarah asked, unease coiling in her stomach. Kaelin's expression darkened to something truly dangerous. "It means they're challenging my claim to you," he answered, rage barely contained beneath his controlled exterior. "And by ancient law, they're demanding trial by combat for the right to take you back." Chapter 5, The Challenge. The forgotten princess stood alone in moonlight, fingers tracing the crest that had awaited her return for 20 years. While outside her window, an apex alpha prepared to spill blood for a woman whose heart he had yet to claim. Destiny had never been so merciless, nor choice so impossible. Dawn was still hours away as Sarah examined the royal artifacts Elara had brought to her chambers. Remnants of a heritage she couldn't remember. proof of an identity that felt like someone else's clothing, ill-fitting and foreign against her skin. A silver circlet inlaid with sapphires. Ceremonial robes in starcrest blue bearing the royal insignia. Documents detailing bloodlines and territorial claims. And most haunting of all, a child's blanket with silver threads and stars stitched in blue, recovered from Shadowcrest archives where it had been preserved as evidence of the presumed assassination of the Starcrest line's youngest member. "You don't have to wear any of it," Elara spoke from the doorway, her normal diplomatic composure softened by genuine concern. "Royal trappings don't make you royal, Sarah. The blood does that." "Blood I don't remember carrying," Sarah countered, setting down the circlet. "I feel like an imposter." Elara crossed the room with purposeful strides, her expression serious but kind. "Which is precisely what they intended when they stole you. Not just your freedom, but your identity. Your memories." She touched the blanket gently. "But they couldn't change what flows in your veins." The pendant at Sarah's throat seemed to warm in agreement. Since the confrontation hours earlier, it had become more than jewelry. A talisman connecting her to forgotten heritage, responding to her emotions with subtle variations in temperature and luminosity that only she could detect. "Why reveal me now?" Sarah asked the question that had tormented her since the revelation. "After all these years, why did Overseer Damon practically announce my identity in front of witnesses?" "Because they're desperate," Elara replied grimly. "The challenge for claimed property is a desperate gambit. They don't simply want you back as a slave. They want to prevent you from ever remembering, from reclaiming your birthright to the Eastern Territory, which adjoins Highland Territory lands. If the Eastern Royal Line were restored," Sarah realized, political geography lessons from serving at diplomatic functions surfacing in her memory, the Highland Syndicate would lose their primary trafficking routes. "Precisely," Elara confirmed. "More importantly, evidence of their role in the Starcrest assassination would threaten the entire Highland power structure." The scope of implications staggered Sarah. This wasn't simply about one escaped slave. This was about territories, power structures, and crimes hidden for nearly 2 decades. She had been reduced to property not just for convenient service, but as deliberate erasure of royal bloodline. "Where is Kaelin?" she asked, the question emerging unbidden. Something complicated passed through Elara's expression. "Preparing. The challenge must be answered by tomorrow's moonrise." "He can refuse," Sarah insisted. "This is archaic nonsense. Trial by combat over a person, as if I were disputed hunting ground." "He won't refuse," Elara said softly. "Not just because of the mate bond, though that alone would drive him to accept, but because refusing would acknowledge their claim has merit, that you could be property at all." "Then I should be the one to fight," Sarah declared, frustration burning through her veins. "This is my freedom, my identity at stake, not his." Elara's expression shifted to one of surprised respect. "You're more royal than you realize," she observed. "That combination of practicality and pride is pure Starcrest bloodline. Your mother had it too." The casual mention of her mother, a woman Sarah had no memory of, landed like a physical blow. "You knew her." "I was 16 when our families negotiated the betrothal treaty," Elara confirmed, something like nostalgic sadness softening her features. "Queen Celeste was formidable. Brilliant. You have her eyes." The information settled like weight in Sarah's chest. Connection to a past she couldn't access. Legacy she didn't know how to honor. With every revelation, the chasm between slave Sarah and Princess Seraphina grew wider, more impossible to reconcile. "I need to see him," she decided abruptly. "Before this challenge, I need to." A knock interrupted her. 3 rapid beats against the chamber door. Elara moved to answer it, exchanging quiet words with someone outside before turning back to Sarah. "It seems my brother had the same thought," she said with a knowing look that made heat rise unexpectedly to Sarah's cheeks. "I'll leave you to speak privately." As Elara departed, Kaelin entered, his powerful frame silhouetted against the corridor torchlight. He'd changed from diplomatic attire into training clothes. Simple linen shirt and leather breeches emphasizing his warrior physique rather than his royal status. A thin sheen of sweat glistened on his skin, evidence of intensive preparation. Without the distraction of political crisis or public scrutiny, Sarah found herself acutely aware of his physical presence. The mate bond hummed between them, stronger with each passing hour despite neither having formally acknowledged it beyond the initial claiming. "You've been training," she observed unnecessarily, needing to break the charged silence. "Garrett Brennan is young, arrogant, but formidable," Kaelin replied, moving further into the room with contained grace. "The challenge allows him choice of combat format. We must be prepared for any possibility." "You don't have to do this," Sarah said, echoing her earlier words to Alara. "This fight isn't just about me anymore. It's about territorial politics and hidden crimes. Let the Shadowcrest diplomatic corps handle it through proper channels." "Is that what you want?" Kaelin asked, his silver gaze piercing through pretense. "For me to stand down, to handle your freedom, your identity, your future through proper channels." The question hung between them, deceptively simple yet impossibly complex. "What I want," Sarah began carefully, "is not to be the reason you risk your life or your territory. Not to be fought over like land or traded like political currency. Not to be claimed by anyone, even your mate." The words emerged as barely more than a growl, the alpha in him responding to her implicit rejection. Rather than intimidating her, his intensity ignited something equally powerful within Sarah. Her wolf surged forward, no longer cowed by years of suppression. "Especially my mate," she countered, stepping closer to him with newfound boldness. Because a true mate would understand that after a lifetime as property, being claimed, even by fate, even by you, feels like another cage. The air between them thickened with tension, not just from the mate bond, but from fundamental truths finally spoken aloud. Kaelin remained motionless, something like admiration flickering across his severe features. "You're right," he acknowledged finally, the admission clearly costing his alpha pride. "I claimed you publicly without your consent. I acted on instinct, on the bond's demand, without considering what freedom truly means for someone who never had it." His honesty disarmed her completely. Sarah had expected defensiveness, perhaps even anger. Not this raw vulnerability from an apex alpha. And yet she found herself saying, drawn a step closer by something stronger than conscious thought, "Despite everything, my wolf recognizes yours. Has from the first moment." "Recognition isn't the same as acceptance," Kaelin replied, though his scent had intensified with her proximity, betraying his body's response to her nearness. "The bond exists," Sarah continued, "but your choice matters more." The pendant at her throat pulsed with sudden warmth, almost synchronizing with her accelerated heartbeat. In that moment, something crystallized in Sarah's understanding. Choice wasn't about denying the bond, but claiming it on her own terms. "I don't want you to fight for me as unclaimed property," she said carefully, "or as the lost Starcrest princess, or even as your politically convenient mate." His expression remained perfectly controlled, though the bond between them transmitted the emotional impact of her words: uncertainty, disappointment, resignation. "What do you want then, Sarah?" he asked simply. Without conscious decision, her hand rose to touch his face, fingertips tracing the sharp line of his jaw with unprecedented boldness. The contact sent electric currents through both of them, the bond flaring visibly as silver blue light in the space between their bodies. "I want you to fight with me as your equal," she whispered. "Not for me as your possession." The distinction hung in the air between them, profound despite its subtlety. Kaelin's pupils dilated, silver eyes darkening as he processed her words. "Equal," he repeated, the concept clearly resonating beyond its surface meaning. His hand covered hers where it rested against his cheek, engulfing her smaller fingers with gentle strength. In all things, the question carried layers of implication. Equal as royals, equal as mates, equal in decision and power and future choices that would affect both their lives. In all things, Sarah confirmed, something like certainty settling into her bones despite the tumultuous circumstances surrounding them. With every heartbeat, the space between them reduced, gravitational pull of the mate bond drawing them inexorably closer. Sarah's wolf pressed forward with unprecedented eagerness, no longer fighting the connection, but embracing its potential. "Then I have something to return to you," Kaelin said, releasing her hand to withdraw a small object from his pocket. "Something that belongs to the woman, not the princess or the slave or even the mate." He opened his palm to reveal the moon crystal she had hidden in the carriage, the one she'd been accused of using to manipulate the mate bond. The crystal glowed with internal light, responding to their combined proximity. "How did you find it?" Sarah asked, stunned by its appearance. "I didn't," Kaelin admitted, a rare smile softening his severe features. "It found me, rolled out from the carriage cushions when we were preparing for tomorrow's challenge, practically into my hand. Moon crystals have their own magic, especially around royals with legitimate mate bonds. As the silence stretched, Sarah realized he was waiting for her to take it. Not commanding, not assuming, but allowing her to decide its significance. Her fingers closed around the crystal, its warmth pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. The moment her skin made contact, the mate bond between them flared with blinding intensity. No longer silver blue thread, but molten connection impossible to deny or sever. Between one breath and the next, everything shifted. Not just the physical awareness that had simmered between them since their first meeting, but deeper recognition. Souls aligned across fate and circumstance, finding each other despite impossible odds. "Kalen," she whispered, his name emerging as both question and answer. His control, maintained with iron discipline since claiming her, finally fractured. With predatory grace, he eliminated the remaining distance between them. One hand cupping her face with exquisite gentleness while the other circled her waist, drawing her against the solid warmth of his chest. "May I?" he asked, voice roughened with restraint that cost him visibly. In answer, Sarah rose on tiptoes, closing the final inches separating them. The first touch of his lips against hers ignited something primal and perfect. The mate bond singing between them as their wolves recognized each other on the most fundamental level. What began as tentative exploration quickly deepened into something far more consuming. Centuries of royal protocol and restraint dissolved beneath the more ancient imperatives of mate recognition. His hands tangled in her hair, angling her face to deepen the kiss, while her fingers clutched at his shoulders, anchoring herself against the overwhelming sensation. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Sarah felt fundamentally altered. Not princess or slave or even mate, but simply herself, fully awakened for the first time. "Tomorrow," Kalen said, his forehead resting against hers, "I fight not for claimed property, but with my equal, for both our futures, for the truth Highland territory has buried for 20 years. The vow settled between them, weighted with royal authority and personal promise. Beyond the chamber windows, the moon had begun its descent, marking the approach of a day that would transform not just their lives, but the power balance between territories. Sarah reached up to touch the pendant at her throat, the star-crest royal insignia warming beneath her fingers with ancient magic. "Together," she agreed, the word both commitment and declaration of independence. As equals before the moon goddess and the territories. The kiss that sealed their covenant carried the weight of both personal choice and political revolution. An apex alpha and a slave-turned-princess rewriting fate on their own terms. Regardless of what tomorrow's challenge might bring, destiny had shifted. Chapter 6, Blood and Steel. Death had a particular scent, metallic and primal. It filled the ceremonial arena as Sarah watched Garrett Brennan's claw slice through Kalen's shoulder, drawing first blood in a combat where her freedom, her identity, and their shared future hung in perfect, terrible balance. In that crimson moment, she realized loving an alpha meant accepting that his blood might spill for promises made in moonlight. The challenge grounds sprawled across neutral territory, an ancient circular arena carved into stone generations ago when disputes between wolves were settled by fang and claw rather than diplomatic treaties. Tiered seating surrounded the combat space, filled with representatives from all territories who had traveled swiftly to witness the unprecedented spectacle. An apex alpha fighting for a claimed mate against Highland territory challengers. Mourning had transformed Sarah from former slave to public figure. Under Alara's guidance, she had donned clothing that symbolically bridged her identities. A simple but elegant tunic in starcrest blue, shadowcrest silver thread at the hems. Her brand deliberately uncovered to remind all witnesses of Highland crimes. The pendant containing her royal crest rested prominently at her throat, no longer hidden, but displayed as deliberate declaration. Meanwhile, power politics unfolded around her existence. The Eastern Territory, ruled by Highland puppets since the Starcrest Line's fall, had sent panicked representatives. Northern diplomats watched with calculating interest. And most troubling, whispers circulated that additional Highland forces gathered at territory borders, suggesting the challenge's outcome might trigger larger conflict. Sarah had been positioned in the Shadowcrest delegation's viewing section, directly across from Lord Brennan and his Highland contingent. Overseer Damon sat slightly behind his lord, those calculating eyes never leaving Sarah's face. When Kalen had entered the arena, the gathered crowd fell silent. The Apex Alpha had foregone royal regalia for simple combat attire, black trousers, boots, and nothing else. His powerful torso bore ceremonial markings painted in silver, ancient symbols of pack and protection. He moved with lethal grace, every step declaring predatory confidence. Opposite him, Garrett Brennan had tried matching the intimidation display, his lean frame marked with Highland territory symbols. But where Kaelin's power read as contained control, Garrett projected desperate aggression. The terms had been announced by a neutral arbiter. Combat to submission. Shifting permitted. Weapons forbidden. The prize, though Sarah's jaw clenched at the terminology, was exclusive claim to the Omega known as Sarah, contested property of Highland territory. No mention of royal bloodlines. No acknowledgement of her Starcrest heritage. Those political implications remained carefully unspoken in this ancient ritual focused solely on primal claim. Now, as first blood marked the stone floor, the crowd's energy shifted palpably. Garrett circled Kaelin with newfound confidence, partially shifted, claws extended. The wound on Kaelin's shoulder looked worse than it likely was. Tactical first strike designed to draw gasps from spectators rather than cause serious damage. Yielding so soon, Apex Alpha? Garrett taunted, voice pitched to carry. Perhaps your advanced age slows your reflexes. Kaelin's expression remained impassive, though Sarah could feel the bond between them pulsing with controlled power. He was calculating, measuring, not simply reacting to provocation. Interesting strategy, he replied calmly, shifting smoothly into fighting stance. Announcing your attacks with unnecessary commentary. Before Garrett could respond, Kaelin moved, a blur of controlled violence that sent the younger Alpha staggering backward. 3 precise strikes, so fast most eyes couldn't follow them. Garrett's chest now bore matching claw marks, deeper than his own attack had inflicted. The crowd roared its approval, primal excitement overriding political affiliations. This was wolf justice in its most ancient form, speaking to instincts that transcended diplomatic niceties. Alara leaned closer to Sarah, her voice pitched below the crowd's noise. He's restraining himself, fighting for show rather than quick victory. Why? Sarah questioned, tension coiling through her body as she watched blood drip from both combatants. Because this isn't just about winning the challenge, Alara explained grimly. It's about public demonstration of Highland crimes. Every minute this continues gives witnesses time to see what they've done, to question why they fight so desperately to reclaim one supposed slave. The explanation made strategic sense. Yet watching Kaelin deliberately extend combat, accept wounds he could avoid, twisted something primal in Sarah's chest. The mate bond transmitted echoes of his physical state, his control, his power, but also the sting of torn flesh and the effort of restraint. Without warning, Garrett lunged with unexpected speed, catching Kaelin in a maneuver that sent both wolves crashing against the arena wall nearest the Highland delegation. Lord Brennan rose halfway from his seat, anticipation written across his features. In the momentary tangle of limbs, something passed between the combatants, words too quiet for spectators to hear. But Sarah saw Kaelin's expression harden instantaneously. When they separated, the Apex Alpha's calculated restraint had vanished. Silver eyes had darkened to obsidian, his partial shift progressing further than before. Claws lengthening, canines extending, the powerful muscles of his back rippling with barely contained transformation. What happened? Sarah whispered urgently to Alara. What changed? But the answer came from an unexpected source. Torval, the war commander, who had positioned himself protectively behind Sarah's seat. Leverage, he growled, disgust evident. Young Brennan just threatened something more valuable than this challenge. Before she could question further, Kaelin attacked with terrifying precision. No longer fighting for show or strategic delay. Each strike targeted vulnerability with ruthless efficiency. Garrett staggered backward, overwhelmed by the sudden onslaught, his earlier confidence evaporating beneath superior skill and strength. Within moments, the younger Alpha was on defensive retreat, blood flowing from multiple wounds as he struggled to maintain footing. The crowd's roar intensified, bloodlust rising as dominance displayed itself in primal terms all wolves understood. Yield, Kaelin commanded, voice distorted by partial shift. Yield now and retain some dignity. Instead of submission, desperation flashed across Garrett's features. His gaze darted toward his father, then to Overseer Damon, whose slight nod communicated something significant. As if pulled by strings, Garrett's hand moved to his waistband, extracting something that glinted in the midday sun. A blade, wickedly curved and unmistakably coated with some substance that didn't match the metallic sheen of regular steel. Poison, Torval snarled, already moving toward the arena entrance. Nightshade extract. Fatal to royal bloodlines. The forbidden weapon raised gasps of outrage from neutral witnesses. The arbiter moved to intervene, but distance and protocol slowed response. Under the weight of his stare, Sarah watched horror unfold as Garrett lunged with desperate speed, blade aimed at Kaelin's exposed torso. Time seemed to slow. The bond between them flared with blinding intensity. No longer just emotional connection, but something more tangible. Without conscious thought, Sarah gripped the pendant at her throat, the royal crest burning beneath her fingers as something ancient and powerful surged through her veins. No, the word tore from her throat. Not just sound, but command carrying the weight of royal blood. What happened next would be discussed in territory histories for generations. The moon crystal in her pocket, the one Kaelin had returned to her, blazed with sudden light, visible even through the fabric. The pendant at her throat responded in kind, silver blue fire seeming to engulf her fingers without burning. That energy arced across the arena like lightning, connecting directly with Kaelin at the exact moment Garrett's blade would have struck. Silver blue light enveloped the apex alpha, his eyes flaring with matching radiance. With impossible speed, he caught Garrett's wrist mid-strike, the poison blade stopping inches from its target. Royal magic, someone gasped nearby. Starcrest line power. The moment hung suspended, the entire arena frozen in shock as visible evidence of Sarah's heritage manifested beyond denial. Then Kaelin moved, twisting Garrett's arm with controlled violence until bones snapped audibly. The blade clattered to the stone floor as the Highland Alpha howled in pain. In one fluid motion, Kaelin forced his opponent to his knees, claws positioned at the vulnerable juncture of neck and shoulder, the killing position in wolf combat. "Yield," he commanded again, voice carrying absolute authority. Broken and bleeding, Garrett had no choice. "I yield," he gasped, the formal submission echoing across suddenly silent witnesses. The arbiter moved forward quickly. Challenge complete. Victory to Apex Alpha Kaelin Northmire of the Shadowcrest Mountains. Claim to the Omega confirmed by ancient law and combat right. But Kaelin hadn't released his defeated opponent. His gaze lifted to where Lord Brennan stood rigid with fury, then to Overseer Damon's calculating presence behind him. "The challenge is satisfied," Kaelin announced, voice pitched to carry to every witness. But Highland crimes remain unaddressed. Attempted murder by poison blade. Enslavement of royal bloodline. The assassination of the Starcrest line. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as implications registered. Kaelin continued relentlessly. "I claim not just the Omega, but justice for 20 years of territorial violations. The Eastern Territory rightfully belongs to the Starcrest heir, to Princess Seraphina, last of her bloodline, whom you enslaved and branded as property." Chaos erupted in the Highland delegation. Lord Brennan bellowed denials while Overseer Damon made swift, furtive movements, hand signals to figures positioned around the arena's perimeter. Torval noticed immediately, barking commands to Shadowcrest guards. Between one heartbeat and the next, the challenge ground transformed from ceremonial space to tactical battlefield. Highland agents emerged from the crowd, weapons drawn. Shadowcrest guards formed protective formations around key figures. Eastern and Northern representatives scattered in panic. Amidst the erupting chaos, Sarah's focus remained fixed on Kaelin. Blood streaked his powerful frame, yet he moved with undiminished grace as he dispatched Garrett to Shadowcrest guards and crossed the arena toward her, silver eyes never leaving her face. The bond between them pulsed almost visibly, strengthened rather than weakened by the public display of her power. As he reached the Shadowcrest delegation section, diplomatic protocol shattered completely. Kaelin vaulted the barrier separating spectators from arena floor, landing directly before her. "The Highland delegation is attempting evacuation," Torval reported urgently. "Damon's already slipped away. We need to secure." "The princess," Kaelin interrupted, his attention never wavering from Sarah. "And prepare for territory war. The Highlands won't surrender their puppet control of the East without bloodshed." Around them, protective formations tightened as Shadowcrest forces responded to emerging threats. Yet in the eye of this storm, Sarah found herself strangely calm. The pendant at her throat had cooled, its power receding but not vanishing. The moon crystal in her pocket remained warm against her thigh, connecting her to something larger than immediate danger. "You knew I could do that," she said quietly to Kaelin, understanding dawning. "The royal magic. You provoked this public demonstration deliberately." His blood-streaked face softened momentarily, pride evident beneath tactical focus. "I suspected," he corrected. Starcrest bloodline women historically manifested protective powers when their mates faced mortal threat. But suspicion isn't proof. We needed incontrovertible evidence of your heritage before neutral witnesses. "So you risked death by poison blade," Sarah concluded, torn between admiration for his strategic brilliance and fury at his self-endangerment. "I risked everything the moment I claimed you," Kaelin countered, something fierce and tender transforming his battle-hardened expression. "And would again 1,000 times over." The declaration hung between them, weighted with blood and combat and public testament. Not flowery courtship or political convenience, but wolf truth stripped to its essence. Protection, sacrifice, commitment transcending rational calculation. As chaos swirled around them and the foundations of territorial power trembled, Sarah made her choice. With deliberate movement, she reached for his bloodied hand, twining their fingers together in public declaration. "Not claimed," she corrected firmly. "Chosen. By both of us." His smile, rare and transformative, flashed briefly before tactical necessity reasserted itself. "We need to move. Highland reinforcements will arrive within hours." Alara appeared at their side, already coordinating evacuation plans. "The Shadowcrest contingent is ready. Eastern representatives are requesting asylum, those not aligned with Highland interests." "And the North?" Kaelin questioned. Declaring neutrality while calculating advantage, Alara replied with diplomatic precision. As preparations accelerated around them, Sarah found herself at the center of political revolution sparked by her very existence. Former slave to contested property to revealed princess in mere days. The transformation should have overwhelmed her. Instead, with Kaelin's hand still entwined with hers, the path forward seemed suddenly, strangely clear. "The Eastern Territory," she said, decision crystallizing. "We go there first. Not as conquerors, but as liberators. My people have lived under Highland control for 20 years. They deserve to choose their allegiance freely." Surprise and approval flickered across multiple faces. This was not the suggestion of a former slave accustomed to following orders, but a royal heir claiming birthright responsibility. "The East has strategic advantages for defensive positioning," Torval acknowledged, already mentally recalculating, "and symbolic value that could rally additional support. It's also directly challenging Highland territorial claims," Alara cautioned, though her expression suggested admiration rather than disagreement. Kaelin's silver gaze remained fixed on Sarah, something like pride mingling with tactical assessment. "Are you certain? Once we make this move, there's no retreat. It's open declaration of war against Highland territory." The question hung between them, not testing or doubting, but ensuring her full understanding and consent. The bond transmitted his absolute commitment to whichever path she chose. Sarah's fingers tightened around his, the moon crystal in her pocket pulsing in rhythm with her decision. "They declared war the moment they stole a royal child and branded her as property," she answered, certainty hardening her voice. "I'm simply acknowledging reality and bringing it into the light." As the chaos of evacuation swirled around them, something shifted in their connection. No longer just mate recognition or political alliance, but true partnership forged in blood, combat, and shared purpose. "Then we move east," Kaelin declared, the command rippling outward as his officers immediately began implementation. "And Highland territory learns what happens when they mistake a queen for a slave." Chapter 7. The Blood Contract. The contract arrived soaked in blood, delivered by a messenger who collapsed at Sarah's feet after fighting through Highland lines. His final words changed everything. The betrothal document. Your father's seal, never broken. In his trembling hand lay proof that the slave-turned-princess was legally promised to another alpha, one who had never relinquished his claim, despite 20 years of believing her dead. Starfall Castle rose from the misty valley like a memory given form. Ancient stonework embedded with sapphires that glowed faintly in twilight, illuminating carvings of wolves running beneath eternal stars. For generations, this fortress had protected the Eastern Territory's heart, until the night of blood and betrayal when the Starcrest line fell. Now, after a week of strategic advances that sent Highland forces retreating in disarray, the last heir had returned. The Shadowcrest forces had secured the castle and surrounding villages with surprising ease. Many eastern citizens, long resentful of Highland control, welcomed the Starcrest banner flying once more. Others remained cautious, watching from windows as warriors in Shadowcrest silver and Starcrest blue patrolled streets together. Sarah stood on the highest parapet, wind whipping her hair as she absorbed the landscape spreading before her. Rolling hills, dense forests, distant mountains capped with snow despite early summer. Territory she was expected to rule by birthright, though she had no memory of its features or its people. "Your mother brought you here each morning," a soft voice said behind her, "to greet the stars at dawn and remember what you protected." Sarah turned to find an elderly woman watching her with tear-bright eyes. Elara had introduced her as Marin, former handmaiden to Queen Celeste, and one of the few royal staff who survived the assassination by virtue of being in the village that fateful night. "I have no memories of this place," Sarah admitted, fingers touching the pendant at her throat as if it might somehow transfer recollection. "Or of her." "But your blood remembers," Marin replied with quiet certainty. "The castle recognized you the moment you crossed the threshold." The stones awakened. It was true. Upon entering her ancestral home, Sarah had felt something stir around her. The embedded sapphires brightening visibly, a shiver running through ancient foundations like a sleeping giant slowly waking. The Shadowcrest guards had looked around in alarm while Eastern servants fell to their knees in wonder. Starcrest magic, ancient and elemental. "The Highland wolves will return," Sarah said, changing the subject from uncomfortable reminders of powers she didn't understand. Their retreat was tactical, not surrender. "They'll find the East changed," Marin answered with surprising steel. "News of your return spreads faster than Highland scouts can track. Villages are raising Starcrest banners long hidden in attics and cellars. The people remember what was stolen." Before Sarah could respond, the heavy door to the parapet swung open. Kalen entered, his commanding presence filling the space instantly. Though still bearing bandages from the challenge combat, he moved with power undiminished, silver eyes tracking immediately to Sarah's position. "Leave us," he instructed Marin, though his tone carried respect rather than dismissal. The older woman bowed slightly to Sarah before departing, years of royal protocol resurfacing naturally despite the interim decades. Once alone, Kalen crossed to where Sarah stood, close enough that his warmth reached her despite the evening chill. Since claiming Eastern territory, their moments of privacy had been precious few, both consumed with tactical planning, territorial security, and the complex politics of restoration. "The messenger?" Sarah asked, noting the grave cast to Kalen's features. "Stabilized. Our healers expect recovery." His jaw tightened perceptibly. But the document he carried changes circumstances significantly. From within his jacket, Kalen withdrew a leather case bearing the unmistakable seal of the Northern Territory, a raven clutching a branch of ironwood. Inside lay a parchment, remarkably preserved despite bloodstains at its edges. "A betrothal contract," he explained, voice carefully neutral. "Signed by your father before your disappearance. Sealed with Starcrest royal wax and Northern Territorial blood oath." Sarah's fingers trembled slightly as she accepted the document. Ancient legal script detailed terms of alliance through marriage between the Starcrest princess and the Northern Territory's heir, Marcus Ironwing, now alpha in his own right. The Northern delegation's neutrality during the challenge, she realized aloud. They weren't calculating advantage. They were confirming my identity against this contract. "Precisely," Kalen confirmed, his expression shadowed with something complicated. "By ancient law, the contract remains binding unless formally dissolved by both parties." The implication struck Sarah like physical impact. "So I'm promised to an alpha I've never met. One who apparently maintained claim despite believing me dead for 20 years. Marcus Ironwing is formidable," Kalen acknowledged, diplomatic training evident in his careful phrasing. "His territory controls the largest ironwood forests outside Shadowcrest Mountains. His forces are significant, his political influence considerable. What remained unspoken hung heavier between them. This contract challenged Kalen's claim directly, created potential conflict between Shadowcrest and Northern Territories at precisely the moment unity was needed against Highland aggression. More importantly, it threatened the mate bond slowly deepening between them with each passing day. The contract predates the mate bond, Sarah observed quietly. By law, it takes precedence. By some interpretations, Kaelin countered, silver eyes darkening slightly. Others maintain that mate bonds recognized by the moon goddess supersede mortal contracts. The tension thickened between them, not from anger but from unspoken feelings neither had fully articulated amid the whirlwind of political crisis. The bond hummed with muted intensity, transmitting emotional undercurrents beyond words. What does Northern Territory want? Sarah asked practically, forcing herself to think like the royal she was supposed to be rather than the woman whose heart accelerated whenever Kaelin stood this close. Alliance through marriage as originally intended, he replied with blunt honesty. Ironwing sends word he'll arrive within 3 days to claim his betrothed and support Eastern restoration with Northern forces. Sarah turned back to the parapet edge, seeking composure in the sweeping landscape below. The star-crest lands spread before her, beautiful, foreign, supposedly hers to protect. And now another complication, another claim on her identity and future. You're unusually quiet, she observed after several moments of Kaelin's continued silence. No strategic analysis, no diplomatic solution. When he didn't immediately respond, she turned to find him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. The careful restraint he'd maintained since their arrival in Eastern Territory had thinned dangerously. I have several strategies, he admitted, voice roughened with emotion he rarely displayed. None of which honor the freedom of choice I promised you. The candid admission struck deeper than calculated reassurance would have. Between them, the mate bond flared with sudden heat, responding to vulnerable truth. Tell me, Sarah requested, closing the distance between them by one deliberate step. Kaelin's expression darkened further, silver eyes now stormy gray with suppressed feeling. The alpha in me wants to challenge Ironwing directly. Blood combat for mate claim, regardless of ancient contracts. Her pulse quickened at the raw possessiveness in his voice, her wolf responding with answering intensity. The king in me, he continued, visibly reining himself back, recognizes the strategic value of Northern alliance through marriage. Combined with Shadowcrest support, it would create overwhelming force against Highland aggression. Another step closer, drawn by something beyond conscious thought. And the man, she whispered. What does he want? The question shattered something fundamental in Kaelin's careful control. With predatory grace, he eliminated the remaining distance between them, one hand rising to cradle her face with devastating gentleness. The man, he growled softly, wants his mate, contract or no contract. Politics be damned. The confession ignited something primal between them. The mate bond surging with such force that Sarah's eyes shifted involuntarily to molten gold. Beneath her palm, his heartbeat thundered against powerful muscle, echoing the rhythm pounding in her own chest. I should be considering Eastern Territory interests, she murmured, even as her body swayed closer to his heat, weighing Northern alliance against Shadowcrest support, being the princess everyone suddenly expects. And what does Sarah want? He countered, echoing her earlier question, fingers threading through her hair with exquisite care. Not the princess, not the political piece. You. The distinction meant everything. Recognition of her personhood beyond bloodlines and politics, beyond even the mate bond itself. I want choice, she answered honestly. Real choice, not obligation disguised as destiny. His silver eyes searched hers intently. Even if that choice isn't me? The vulnerability beneath the question struck deep. This powerful alpha, this mountain king who had upended international politics for her, revealing uncertainty that his diplomatic mask never showed the world. Without conscious decision, Sarah rose on tiptoes, eliminating the final distance between them. My wolf chose you the moment our eyes met, she whispered against his lips. But now the woman chooses too. Not because of bonds or bloodlines or ancient magic. Because you've given me the one thing no one else ever has, the freedom to decide my own fate. The kiss that followed consumed them both. No longer tentative exploration, but hungry claiming on both sides. His arms encircled her completely, lifting her against his chest as her fingers tangled in his midnight hair. The mate bond blazed between them, silver blue light illuminating the darkening parapet as moon and stone and blood magic recognized completion. When they finally broke apart, breathing heavily, reality reasserted itself in the form of distant war horns. Highland forces regrouping faster than anticipated. We have company, Kaelin observed, though he made no move to release her. Sarah nodded, reluctantly shifting back into tactical consideration. And soon northern forces as well, with a contract that threatens everything between us. Rather than offering false reassurance, Kaelin's expression settled into determined resolve. Then we have 2 days to solidify Eastern support and determine our response to Ironwing's claim. Our response, Sarah repeated, noting the subtle but significant phrasing. Not yours, not mine. Ours. The distinction illuminated a path forward. Not princess and king as separate entities, but partners facing crisis together. Just as they'd stood against Highland challengers. Just as they'd navigated her revelation and recovery. Ironwing expects an Eastern princess raised in Northern customs, Sarah said thoughtfully, tactical mind engaging. A docile royal bride honoring ancient contracts without question. A slow, dangerous smile spread across Kaelin's features. The expression of an alpha recognizing his mate's strength rather than feeling threatened by it. What he'll find, Kaelin completed, is a queen who survived 20 years of enslavement, who challenged Highland territory openly, and who carries both Starcrest magic and Shadowcrest alliance. The war horns sounded again, closer now. Around the castle, defensive preparations accelerated. Guards taking positions, civilians moving to protected areas, healers preparing for casualties. As twilight deepened into true night, the embedded sapphires throughout Starfall Castle brightened further, responding to their princess's presence and the rising full moon. The pendant at Sarah's throat warmed against her skin, pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. I may not remember being Princess Seraphina, she said, determination hardening her voice as she gazed out at the territory she was born to protect. But the Highlands will certainly remember meeting her. Kaelin's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining as they had on the challenge ground. Equal partners before the coming storm. And so will the North, he added, the promise in his voice carrying weight beyond diplomatic niceties. Contract or no contract. Between them, the mate bond settled into steady silver-blue certainty. Not fate's imposition, but choice confirmed. Strengthened rather than weakened by the challenges gathering on their horizon. Chapter 8. The Crown and the Covenant. She wore her slave brand uncovered to her own coronation. The scarred flesh a silent testament against the Northern Alpha who watched from the audience with cold calculation in his amber eyes and a blood contract clutched in his fist. Some chains, Sarah had decided, should be displayed rather than hidden, especially when breaking them before those who forged them. The great hall of Starfall Castle blazed with light from 1,000 embedded sapphires, their glow intensifying with each step Sarah took down the ancient aisle. Representatives from all territories, save the conspicuously diminished Highland delegation, rose as she passed. Some with genuine reverence, others with wary assessment of the slave-turned-royal whose existence had upended territorial politics within a fortnight. The Northern Territory contingent stood rigidly formal, their alpha at the forefront. Marcus Ironwing cut an impressive figure, tall and hawk-like with amber eyes and iron-gray hair despite his relative youth. His aristocratic features schooled to diplomatic neutrality, despite the betrothal contract's public rejection only hours earlier. I honor your claim by blood covenant, Sarah had told him during their private audience, her voice steady despite the tension radiating from both Marcus and Kaelin, who had refused to leave her side. But I reject its execution. The princess who was promised to you died the night Highland assassins destroyed her family. The woman who stands before you was forged in different fires. Marcus had studied her with unnerving intensity before responding. The contract bears stipulations should either party reject fulfillment. Blood price must be paid, in service, in alliance, or in territory concession. It was Kaelin who had offered the diplomatic solution that now hung in careful balance. The Shadowcrest Mountains will absorb the blood price. Triple trading rights through northern passes. Military support against Highland aggression. And recognition of northern territorial expansion into disputed Highland lands once the conflict resolves. Now, as Sarah approached the ancient throne carved from sapphire-infused granite, she felt the weight of that negotiation and the unspoken truth behind it. Kaelin had sacrificed significant Shadowcrest advantage to secure her freedom from the betrothal, not as alpha-claiming property, but as mate-honoring choice. The Eastern Territory's ancient coronation regalia waited upon velvet cushions, a silver circlet embedded with star-shaped sapphires, a ceremonial cloak bearing the Starcrest crest, and most significantly, the royal signet ring last worn by her murdered father. Elder Marin stood ready to conduct the ceremony, her weathered hands steadier than her voice as she began the ritual invocation to the moon goddess. Sarah's gaze found Kaelin among the gathered dignitaries. The Apex Alpha stood with perfect military bearing, his silver eyes never leaving her face. Unlike the northern contingent's careful neutrality, his expression held open pride, not possessive, but affirming, recognizing her journey from slave to sovereign. The mate bond between them had strengthened impossibly after their decision to face northern claims together, transforming from silver blue thread to unbreakable connection that hummed with constant awareness. Even now, across the crowded hall, she could feel his steady presence anchoring her against the overwhelming gravity of the moment. Princess Seraphina Celeste Starcrest. Marin's voice carried across the hushed assembly, using her full birth name for the first time in Sarah's conscious memory. Last of the royal Starcrest line, rightful heir to the Eastern Territory, daughter of moon and stone. Do you accept the sacred duty of protection and guidance over these lands and people? The formal question hung in expectant silence. This was the moment every political strategist had anticipated since her identity's revelation. Her public claiming of birthright, her formal acceptance of royal status after 20 years of enforced servitude. What none of them expected was her actual response. I cannot accept what was never truly lost, Sarah answered, her voice clear and carrying to the farthest corners of the hall. The slave known as Sarah and the princess named Seraphina are the same woman, forged through suffering but never broken by it. Murmurs rippled through the assembly as she continued, deliberately departing from traditional acceptance. I stand before you bearing both identities, the brand of Highland cruelty. She lifted her scarred wrist. And the bloodline of Starcrest sovereignty. She touched the pendant at her throat, which blazed with sudden silver-blue light in response. The embedded sapphires throughout the hall pulsed in sympathetic resonance, casting rippling patterns across marble floors and ancient tapestries. Gasps emerged from those witnessing Starcrest magic firsthand for the first time. I accept not just ancient duty, but new purpose, Sarah declared, her gaze sweeping deliberately toward the diminished Highland delegation cowering at the hall's furthest edge. The Eastern Territory will never again allow its people, any of its people, to be treated as property. The institution of slavery ends today, not just within our borders, but wherever Starcrest influence extends. The declaration landed like thunderclap. Northern representatives shifted uncomfortably, while Shadowcrest wolves nodded in approval. The Highland delegates looked positively ill. Furthermore, Sarah continued, political strategy crystallizing as she spoke, the Eastern Territory cannot stand alone against those who would restore the old order. We require alliance, not through forced marriage or ancient contracts, but through mutual respect and shared purpose. Her gaze shifted deliberately to Kaelin, the mate bond between them flaring visibly as silver-blue light connecting their bodies across the ceremonial space. Several witnesses crossed protective symbols over their chests at this public display of mate magic, rarely witnessed in modern times. Therefore, I propose union between Eastern and Shadowcrest territories, Sarah announced, causing fresh shock to ripple through the assembly. Not absorption or subjugation, but true partnership between equal sovereigns. Kaelin's expression revealed nothing, though the bond transmitted his momentary surprise followed by swift strategic comprehension. They had discussed various defensive alliances, but not this direct proposal, which transcended personal relationship to forge new territorial reality. Such union, Elder Marin spoke cautiously, has no precedent in territorial histories. Then we create precedent, Sarah replied simply. Just as my existence creates precedent. Just as this moment creates new possibility. The elder hesitated, centuries of protocol warring with unprecedented circumstance. Finally, she nodded once and lifted the coronation circlet. Then by ancient rite and new declaration, I crown you Queen Sarah of the Eastern Territory. First of her reclaimed line, breaker of chains. As the silver circlet settled against her temples, the embedded sapphires blazed with blinding brilliance. Throughout the hall, answering light pulsed from walls and floors and ancient artifacts long dormant. The castle itself seemed to recognize its rightful queen, magic awakening that had slumbered since the royal bloodline's apparent extinction. When the radiance subsided, Sarah stood transformed, not by regalia or title, but by the quiet certainty that settled into her bones like inheritance finally claimed. The slave collar's ghost no longer haunted her throat. The royal crown no longer felt foreign against her skin. Both were simply parts of who she had become. The Queen of the Eastern Territory recognizes Apex Alpha Kaelin Northmire of the Shadowcrest Mountains, she announced formally, using royal address for the first time. Approach the throne. The assembly parted as Kaelin moved forward with predatory grace, power contained in each deliberate step. He stopped precisely at the traditional distance for diplomatic audience, neither presuming greater intimacy nor diminishing his own authority. The Shadowcrest Mountains hear the Eastern Territory's proposal of union, he responded, formal language masking the emotional current flowing through their bond. We acknowledge its unprecedented nature and its strategic wisdom. Diplomatic dance continued before rapt witnesses. Two sovereigns negotiating new territorial reality while underneath. Mate recognition pulsed with increasing intensity. The political and personal intertwined so completely that neither could be separated from the other. And what terms would the Apex Alpha propose for such union? Sarah asked, the ritualistic question carrying layers of meaning beyond politics. Kaelin's silver eyes held hers with unwavering focus. Equal sovereignty. Shared counsel. Combined military force against Highland aggression. His voice deepened slightly. And formal. Recognition of the mate bond between rulers, sanctifying the union before wolves and moon goddess alike. The last condition silenced even the most restless witnesses. Mate bonds between royals were exceedingly rare. Their public acknowledgement and formal incorporation into territorial governance entirely unprecedented. From the northern section, Marcus Ironwing watched with calculated assessment rather than the outrage many expected. His amber gaze shifted between the two rulers, measuring unseen variables beyond immediate politics. The Eastern Territory finds these terms acceptable, Sarah declared, rising from the ancient throne to stand as equal before her mate. With one additional condition. Expectant silence fell as she continued. The Highland Syndicate must answer for crimes against all territories. Not just the enslavement of a royal heir, but the systematic trafficking of wolves across territorial boundaries for generations. Kaelin's expression revealed nothing, but through their bond flowed approval and fierce pride. The Shadowcrest Mountains will support this justice, he agreed formally. As if orchestrated by unseen signal, the massive doors to the Great Hall swung open. Shadowcrest and Eastern Guards entered in formation, surrounding a thin, spectral figure whose sallow features had haunted Sarah's nightmares for years. Overseer Damon, captured during Highland retreat, stumbled forward in chains that seemed poetic justice for the slave master who had branded countless wolves as property. The architect of Highland crimes, Kaelin announced to the assembly. Captured with documentation proving systematic kidnapping operations targeting Omega wolves throughout all territories. Confessed orchestrator of the Starcrest Line assassination. Gasps and exclamations filled the hall as guards forced Damon to his knees before the throne. The syndicate overseer's calculating eyes had lost their cold confidence, now darting frantically between potential allies, finding none. You were wise to fear me, Sarah told him quietly, no longer the trembling servant avoiding his gaze, but sovereign passing judgment. Not because of royal blood or Starcrest magic, but because even as a slave, I remembered what you tried to make me forget. That no wolf is property. That no chain is permanent. She stepped closer, the silver circlet gleaming in torchlight. Look at me, Damon. See what becomes of those you tried to break. Defeated, the syndicate overseer raised his gaze and flinched visibly at the power radiating from the woman he had once branded as less than nothing. By joint authority of Eastern Territory and Shadowcrest Mountains, Sarah pronounced, Kaelin moving to stand beside her in united judgment. You will face trial before representatives of all territories for crimes against wolfkind. Your syndicate will be disbanded, its assets distributed to those it victimized, its practices outlawed in all lands under our protection. The sentence rippled outward, carrying implications far beyond one man's fate. Territorial boundaries redrawn. Power structures reconfigured. Centuries of hierarchical assumptions challenged by the unprecedented alliance forming before witnesses' eyes. As Damon was led away for formal trial, Kaelin turned to face Sarah fully. Protocol momentarily set aside as he extended his hand. Not commanding but inviting, offering partnership rather than dominance. A queen in truth, he said softly, pride evident in every syllable. Exactly as I saw you that first moment, before knowing your name or bloodline. Sarah's fingers met his, contact sending silver blue lights spiraling around their joined hands. The mate bond responded to public declaration, strengthening visibly before the assembled territories. Not just a queen, she corrected gently. A free wolf who chooses her own path, who happens to wear a crown rather than a collar. Around them, the great hall hummed with renewed energy, ancient magic awakening fully after decades of dormancy. Sapphire light illuminating the first moments of a new territorial order. As Kaelin lifted their joined hands in formal presentation to the assembly, Sarah felt the final pieces of her fractured identity align into coherent wholeness. Not slave or princess or mate or queen, but all of these experiences integrated into the woman she had become through fire and shadow and unexpected liberation. The moon goddess witnesses this union, Elder Marin proclaimed, formal blessings sealing what fate and choice had already ordained. What was sundered is rejoined. What was broken is made whole. The coronation transformed seamlessly into union ceremony as Kaelin and Sarah exchanged formal vows before representatives of all territories. Not as property exchanged or political convenience, but as equals choosing shared destiny. Apex Alpha and Starcrest Queen, bridging bloodlines and borders through bond both mystical and deeply personal. When Kaelin finally claimed her lips in the ceremonial sealing kiss, the mate bond erupted with such blinding intensity that several witnesses shielded their eyes. Ancient magic recognized completion as royal bloodlines united exactly as intended generations earlier, though by paths no strategist could have predicted. In that suspended moment of perfect connection, Sarah acknowledged the strange symmetry of her journey. From branded property to territorial sovereign. From silent servant to voice of justice. From owning nothing to woman who owned her own destiny. The brand on her wrist no longer burned with shame, but blazed with promise. Testament to survival, to transformation, to strength that transcended chains both literal and figurative. As she and Kaelin turned to face their united kingdoms for the first time, Sarah allowed one simple truth to settle into perfect certainty. She had been born to be traded, raised to obey. But when he looked at her, she remembered who she was. And when she looked back, they became something the world could never silence. From the northern section, Marcus Ironwing stepped forward, his amber eyes thoughtful rather than hostile. The Northern Territory recognizes this union, he announced, surprising many, and offers alliance in the coming conflict. Not through ancient contracts, but through respect for strength and shared purpose. The declaration shifted the entire political landscape. What had been potential three-way conflict transformed into united front against Highland aggression. As celebrations erupted around them and the foundations of old power structures crumbled, Sarah and Kaelin stood at the center of revolution sparked by her very existence. Equal partners before their people and the moon goddess herself. The slave collar was broken, the crown was claimed, and the mate bond burned brighter than any chain ever forged. Outside Starfall Castle, under the light of a full moon, wolves from 3 territories howled in unison. No longer separated by arbitrary borders and ancient prejudices, but united under rulers who understood that true strength lay not in dominance, but in the freedom to choose. In the great hall, Sarah's hand remained entwined with Kaelin's as Elder Marin concluded the ceremony. May the stars guide your reign. May the moon bless your union. May the wolves you protect know freedom as you have claimed it. And in that moment, with sapphire light blazing around them and the weight of 2 crowns settling into place, Sarah understood that her story was just beginning. Not an ending written by others, but a future she would forge with her own hands.